We provided the only source of fully independent data that was streamed live for water quality in the Seine River before, during, and now after the Olympic events. So we had a major monitoring campaign that we started in early April and that still continues today, where we monitored every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, the water quality at.
Welcome to the Urbanista, where we discuss the water management challenges of Nordic cities. From safe drinking water distribution and stormwater collection to building sustainable urban living environments. Here is your host, Delphine Vesalo.
No, hey, welcome back, Urbanistas. It's so nice to be back on your ears. And as you know, here at the Urbanista, we are taking very seriously all the topics about water quality in European cities. All things related to water management, drinking water, stormwater, wastewater, all the things that are related to the holistic management of water in cities. One particular topic that we have been discussing recently is the quality of that water. The quality of the drinking water, of course, that is for all of us living in the cities, but also how the rainwater and the wastewater is treated and what's the impact, the potential impact of those two types of water in the environment once that water is disposed or taken somewhere back in nature. And this is particularly important now when in some parts of the world there's drought, but in some other parts of the world there's increased rainfall. What happens with all that excess water falls on our cities? Of course, that puts extra pressure on the infrastructure that our cities have. And recently, we are recording this now in 2024 autumn. If you have been following the Paris Olympic Games, you may have heard something about the complexity on the quality of water that the River Seine had, and some implications that had for the athletes that were supposed, or well, actually did swim in the River Seine as part of the several competitions. What was happening there? What was the actual situation there? Well, today we have a person who was there specifically, firsthand, and then he can tell us more about that in a moment. So, who are you and what you do?
Thank you very much, Delphine. My name is Dan Angelescu, and I am the CEO of Fluidion, and we are a company specializing in water quality solutions, essentially technologies and then data management solutions to be able to ensure rapid monitoring and accurate monitoring of water quality of all types of water. You mentioned drinking water, surface water, stormwater, wastewater.
All right, so I understand that you have, actually you are doing, or you have done extensive research in all this type of situation. Or can you elaborate a bit more what do you do, what your company does for specific types of water, drinking, rainwater? What do you do exactly with those specific types of water? How do you monitor them?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, water is sort of one, right? So it comes from the sky as rainfall, and then it ends up in rivers. And there it's taken from rivers often, or for groundwater, it's abstracted to create drinking water, obviously. So the quality of the water when it is at the entry point of a drinking water plant is very important, because it needs to be treated to be brought to drinking water standards. And the more pollution you have in a river, the more treatment is required, and in the end, the more chances are that the final finished water quality may not be up to standard if the starting water quality is not very good. So it's very important to be able to monitor that. And then once it's treated, the water goes into the distribution network, you want to be able to monitor to make sure that you have enough secondary disinfectant to make sure that water safely arrives at your tap without bacteria developing. So on the drinking water side, we have both chemical sensors that can be installed pretty much anywhere in the network. These sensors, they are what we call IoT. IoT stands for Internet of Things. So they are IoT connected, meaning that they operate on battery, they send their data remotely. So all you need to do is to connect it to a sample tap, let's say, and then the sensor will sample its own water, analyze it, send the data remotely. So we make this kind of water quality management solution that's very easy to deploy in large networks. And then we get all the data onto a single platform. So you can monitor, you can map water quality, you can understand issues, you can understand the dynamics of different phenomena. One example, what we've been doing a lot in Los Angeles. The city treats the drinking water with chloramine rather than chlorine. This is to reduce the disinfection byproducts, which may be toxic or carcinogenic. And the chloramine is not very stable. So in hot weather, it can dissociate into chlorine and ammonia, and then bacteria. There are nitrifying bacteria that can consume ammonia, transform them to nitrite. So this creates a bacterial bloom into a water tank. So we've developed specific technologies that are able to predict when that's going to happen and to give early warning in the drinking water network. But then another requirement for drinking water is microbiological quality. You need to make sure that there are no bacteria. And there are a number of, or no harmful bacteria that would indicate presence of other pathogens. And one of these regulated bacteria is E. coli. Mm-hmm. And so you want to make sure that the drinking water rules in the developed world say that you should have 0 E. coli bacteria in drinking water. So in drinking water in developed world, mostly it's presence absence tests that tell if the water is compliant or not. If you find presence of E. coli, then the water is not compliant, it needs to be retreated. You usually need to push a boiling water advisory, etc. So that's a big disruption. So we also make microbiological analyzers that are able to do this automatically.
So just to get a better understanding on how do you actually do this test? If we focus for a minute on drinking water, because you touched several topics about diseases, biological agents, E. coli, etc. So if we are in front of a water source, we extract the water from whether it's source water or underground water. The water utility or the entity in charge of that extracts the water and puts it into certain process, whether it's alkalinization in some cases or to neutralize the pH, whether it's biomechanical processes or chemical processes. And then once that water is ready, theoretically ready to be consumed or for human consumption, it gets distributed. So in that initial phase, where do you place your IoT devices, your sensors? How does it look like specifically? And does the sensor that you put actually touch the water, or how does it actually monitor the water flowing? Physically touching it, or how does it work?
Exactly. So you're talking about the intakes of
Yes.
a drinking water plant, and how do we monitor to make sure that the water is not heavily polluted? Because there are management plans. For example, if a river is highly polluted, you might go into a reserve water for a certain time and use that so you don't get the very polluted water. You wait for the pollution to pass. So the question is, how do we measure this pollution of the source water? Mm-hmm. And our microbiological sensors, in this case, they could be installed, let's say, in a river right at the intake mm-hmm. of the drinking water plant. And they have cartridges, and each cartridge can do a microbiological measurement. So these can be either triggered, let's say you have a storm event, and you want to see if that storm event has created a pollution that will affect your intakes. So you can trigger just before, during, and after the storm event, and this way you get what we call a pollutograph. You get a graph of pollution versus time, which tells you exactly what the water quality was at every moment. And yes, these sensors I'm talking about now, they are immersed in water, at least partly. They have sampling ports for each cartridge that are in the water, and then they have a vacuum sampling mechanism that allows each sample to be pulled into the device and analyzed. So yes, there are devices that would be installed, semi-permanently at the intake of a drinking water plant.
All right, but because now you mentioned certain events like storms or things that we cannot control that impact directly the quality of that drinking water. So would you say that you put these sensors before and after the whatever treatment facility? And if these sensors are, I understand, connected to the internet and the information is sent somewhere in some control center, dashboard, etc., what is the use for the water network manager to be monitoring there? If there's an event, how do they see if certain elements that should not be there went up or down? Is the kind of early warning system? How does it look like?
It is an early warning system indeed, and if you're abstracting water from a river, you might want to have a couple of monitoring stations placed upstream on the river to give you a little bit of a buffer time. So when you see something happening, let's say 3-4 kilometers upstream, you know that will come to your intake within a few hours. So you want to be able to have that time to be able to react. So we typically would recommend having sensors upstream and then having sensors at the intake of a drinking water plant. And obviously, if there are known sources of contamination, this could be stormwater outflows or it could be possibly wastewater plant outflows that go in the river, then we definitely recommend monitoring those as well, because those are potential sources of contamination. So typically a water network manager would get this data, would get an early warning. Okay, well, at my upstream station, there is high turbidity, and there is also, we've measured, and there is high E. coli content. Well, that's a pretty good sign that there is sewage contamination there. So what the water manager may decide to do is to stop abstracting water for a number of hours while they monitor at high frequency the upstream location. And once the pollution is gone, then they can reopen the intake and restart treating water from the river. And in the meantime, they may switch to their reserve. Typically, there is a volume of water that is a buffer that's held at the drinking water plant to have a reserve in case something like this happens. So this would allow that process to be much more automatic, and this would really protect the plant from getting a very high pollution in, which can clog the filters, which can require much more intense treatment, much more chemical disinfection, and in the end that may result in substandard water at the output. So you want to avoid that, and we provide the tools to be able to predict when that's going to happen and to be able to react to that rather than react after the fact.
Yes, because that's what I was thinking. In the example that you put now, we have upstream, somewhere in the river, at the source, you have one sensor there, fine, like a couple of kilometers or 4 kilometers, whatever. But the person, the human monitoring or getting the alert may not react like in the next minute, really. So still that water may already have come those few kilometers. Maybe it's already in the reservoir tank, when you mentioned in the buffer, yes. So maybe also inside of that reservoir tank or in the outfall or that tank goes another sensor. Or how, so can you compare those? What would be the use case there?
Absolutely. So you can have also sensing locations within the facility, the treatment facility, to see if your water that you actually are getting today, right now, is contaminated or not. So one would be an early warning, that is the one placed upstream or the ones placed at strategic locations where you might expect contamination to come in. And then you have your process sensors that would be within the plant, which would allow you to get immediate information about what's happening at the plant. Yeah, you're right.
So, my understanding that is kind of an interface, a map, a dashboard type of thing, perhaps with the course of the network, and you can see where the events or where the alert comes specifically.
Yeah, so there are different ways to visualize this. We have a GPS-enabled interface that shows all the sensors at their geographical position and shows the data from all of those sensors. And each end user has a different need for displaying information in a specific way. So in that case, we provide an API which allows each specific utility to download all the data to their dashboard, and then they can display it however they want on their internal dashboard, and that varies a lot from utility to utility, we found. So, but yes, it can be visualized in the way you described, where you see the network, you see the different points, and then maybe you see a red light coming on at one of these sensing sites, and that would allow that would ask you to react to that.
Okay, so it's semi-automatic process because of course there should be always a person responsible, the shift manager, whatever it is, ready to react. And how have you seen in general the reception of this type of devices or this type of technology from the different water utilities? And I'm referring maybe different openness, how to say it, from American cities versus European cities, or perhaps also the Nordics. Drinking water is a matter of social, public safety. Of course, everything that has to do with drinking water is like taken super care. Even the facilities where these buffer tanks are or the source, actually they are confidential, like they are not part of the public knowledge. So how have you seen this type of or different types of water utilities open to install these sensors in their network, which is highly sensible topic? And even more, if they are connected to the internet, sure, you have got this question, like what if it is hacked? What happens?
So there are two questions there. So first, regarding the openness to innovation, and what we found is that different countries and different utilities, even within the same country, have very different strategies and very different levels of acceptance of new technologies. We had the luck to be able to start working on the very first applications with the city of Los Angeles. In fact, we developed our first early warning station because they requested a way to monitor E. coli upstream of their first filtration plant. You may have seen, there are some Chinatown is a movie made, back in the day about the water industry in Los Angeles and how it developed. And one thing that made the urban sprawl of Los Angeles possible is the building of the Mulholland aqueduct, which brings water from the mountains to Los Angeles, and that allowed the city to develop. Well, our very first location was in the Mulholland aqueduct, right upstream of the very first filtration plant in Los Angeles. And we monitored there for several months, and we had, the water quality was pretty good. And from there on, we installed sensors in multiple urban lakes. This time, these are not drinking water sources, but they're recreation waters. And so it developed like that. So we had a utility that was very open to innovation, actually demanding. They had clearly identified this need, and we responded to that need with a system that operated well. So it was adopted. And then the same thing happened in Paris, where the need this time was a little bit different. They weren't worried about the drinking water intakes necessarily as much as about being able to recreate in the surface waters. In view of the coming Olympics, we're talking about the year 2017, so the Olympics were still 7 years ahead, but already the city had won the bid and was was looking at ways to improve the water quality in the river, and obviously it's the microbiological water quality that was critical there. So then they adopted this solution as well, and they started monitoring using our microbiological sensors. So it sort of went, from an early adopter to another early adopter, and then to larger scale adoption within the industry. And the second question you have is about the data security. So one thing we did here, which was praised by a lot of even by governments that we work with, is the fact that we never connect to the IT infrastructure of a client. The IT infrastructure that manages all our sensors is fully independent. So it is the client that connects to our server to get the data. It's never us that make a connection or that send any kind of data into their network. So there is no potential from anyone hacking our devices or hacking our network to get into the customer network. So that's sort of an intrinsic safety of our methodology that's built into the way we work. And then obviously the second question is, so if you're hacked, maybe all this data is going to become public. What we call water quality data, some cities consider it strategic, so what do you do in that case if the data gets out? Well, what we do is we implement the strongest encryption protocols available in industry. So all the data is encrypted end to end between all the devices and our servers. And then we have also, multiple factor authentication. We have a lot of the standard, what has become standard today in protecting personal information, and we implement that in our dashboard. So so far we haven't had any incident with water leaking. With water quality data leaking from our system.
Data leaking from the water leaking. There you go. That's from what you are explaining, I wouldn't say it's just standard security. End-to-end encryption, all these type of security. I would say that's quite comprehensive security system or protection for the data. That's good to hear. We were talking about drinking water. Now moving on, now that you spoke a bit about the Paris city and moving on towards wastewater, stormwater. So what was outside there in the media with the topic about the Olympic Games is Paris as a city. Well, it's an old city. We can imagine that all the stormwater collection and the wastewater infrastructure was old. I understand that the city already did a lot, a huge investment in improving all those networks, precisely as you mentioned, looking towards the Olympics. And so you started already from those early days when the nomination of the city was. But then when we come closer and closer to the actual event, and there was this big news or big focus of the media on the river, specifically, I believe the mayor was also jumping into the river, like achieving, maybe get a bit too politicized at some point, this situation, but let's focus on what was your role there, right by the side of the river Seine. What exactly you did?
Well, we provided the only source of fully independent data that was streamed live for water quality in the Seine River before, during, and now after the Olympic events. So we had a major monitoring campaign that we started in early April, and that still continues today, where we monitored every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, the water quality at the Olympic site, which is the Alexander III Bridge in Paris. Mm-hmm. So the reason we decided to do that was multiple. So the first reason is, the Seine River has been our playground, if you'd like, as a research company, has been our playground for many years. So we know a lot about this river and about how it reacts to weather events especially. But we worked with the city of Paris for 7 years in a row to monitoring every single year For the Olympics, the city of Paris decided to stay with their own laboratory, but we continued our monitoring and we intensified the campaign. And what we did is we not only monitored just standard, E. coli measurements, but our method that we developed allows to provide something that's called comprehensive count of E. coli. That means E. coli that are free floating, we call those planktonic, but then there are also fecal particles in the water, and especially in a urban river which is impacted by untreated sewage, which is the case of Paris and of many large European cities and American cities as well, not just worldwide. It's a worldwide issue. Well, in this kind of sewage-impacted waters, it's natural to find fecal particles of different sizes, microns to tenths of microns in size, because it's a natural byproduct of the, of the disintegration of the fecal matter. So they are present there. The problem that we have today is that the standard methods that are used and that are used by the Olympic Committee, by the City of Paris, the standard methods that are used by the regulations today, they're unable to count bacteria attached to these particles. They count each particle as a single unit, which is one bacterium, even if they carry hundreds of bacteria. And there is even more problem with that, is that these particles, they protect their content. They come directly from the fecal matter, so they're loaded with all the pathogens, all the viruses, right? So they have a big infectious potential. And in fact, they're completely, they go undercover. The standard methods today don't see them. So there is a really major underestimation of risk in these conditions by the standard methods used today. And our method is able to measure these bacteria on the particles. So we developed a new methodology that provides both the planktonic or free-floating count and also what we call the comprehensive count, which includes all the bacteria. And we also measured using the standard methods. So we had 3 types of measurements that we performed on every single sample. And that turned out to be an extremely valuable experience, because what we found out is that the charge and the risk associated with these particles is really big and can be 5-6 times larger than the free-floating bacteria, which are measured by the standard laboratory techniques, which means that in fact there is a poor management of risk and insufficient assessment. There is a underestimation of the risk by the standard method, sometimes by a major factor.
I mean, 5-6 times difference. What you are, that is huge. And actually, because counting the specific particles or having a more accurate measurement of the dimension of the problem, because I remember I read in your website this metaphor that I believe you use for a press conference. I believe this metaphor of a street or a crossroad with cars and buses going in all directions. So that was pretty neat. Can you explain that again? So in simple terms, this is what happens.
So if you think of a river as a big road in a city, and you have a lot of people coming on this road, and you need to know how many people are actually coming. That's a question. How many people are coming in the city? And you have people walking, and you have people, in cars, and you have people in buses, and you have 3 policemen or 2 policemen, and you ask them, okay, count the number of people. So one policeman says, well, I'm going to take a helicopter, I'm going above the intersection, above the road, and I'm seeing it from above so I can see everything. Except that this person will not see how many people are in each car and each bus. So not knowing that, he will count a car as 1 person and the bus as 1 person, even though the bus can contain 50 people and the car can contain 5 people. So this is what the standard methods do today. The second policeman sits in the intersection and stops every single car and every bus, goes inside, counts the number of people, writes it down, and then sums up all these people. And obviously, when you present it like this, it's pretty clear that it is the policeman in the intersection that gets a right count, and the policeman seeing from above, which is the standard laboratory methods today, they will heavily undercount the total number of people. So now the metaphor obviously is, the people are equivalent to E. coli bacteria. Cars are small aggregates or several bacteria together, and a bus would be a fecal particle which carries 50 people, but it can also carry, all the pathogens that are associated with the fecal matter of the originating matter. So it is really a complete undercounting that is done by the standard methods. And what we see is that in some cases the standard methods are right, especially in lakes where the water has a lot of time to sediment. There the count is correct. But in waters like the Seine, where you have sewage overflows and
All the time moving and all the time new water or new inflows coming in, because that is the other thing that you have mentioned. Over time, the measure can change. It's not the same if you take the sample at 7 a.m., then at 10, then at midday, then it can be many variations or huge variations.
yeah, there are a lot of variability. The biggest factor accounting for this variability is rainfall, which means that all this water, since the city of Paris has combined sewer network, and many cities upstream of Paris have combined sewer networks, it means that sewage and rainwater goes through the same pipe. So when you have a lot of rain coming, that pipe, it just cannot carry all the water. It's over capacity. So some of this overflows, and traditionally it would overflow directly in the river. So you have raw sewage that gets in the river. But the city of Paris, in Paris, that has built this big tank, which is 50,000 cubic meters, I believe, that is like a buffer. So now instead of overflowing in the river, all these sewage networks overflow into this tank, which fills up. And then if the rain event is small enough, then it should not overflow. Well, what we've seen during the Olympics is that we have had multiple rain events which have caused this tank to overflow. And in addition to that, we also have a lot of pollution that comes from upstream, where we don't have this retention tank. Cities and that are just upstream on the Seine River, on the Marne River. So we monitor those as well to understand what's the input from the rivers as they join at the entrance of Paris. And we have had some really interesting results. So we have seen that the sewage infrastructure in Paris has overflown a few times during the Olympics, but we've also seen that sometimes the pollution actually comes from upstream, and it comes, it's also affected by sediment being resuspended. So when you have a lot of flow, and during the Olympic Games, the flow was about 400 cubic meters per second. During the Paralympic Games, it was only 200 cubic meters per second.
So what's the difference, or why was that
Well,
happening?
it's mostly rainfall within the whole watershed, right? Upstream, maybe 100 kilometers upstream, 200 kilometers upstream. I mean, the river collects everything that comes in the watershed, and we had a very rainy start of the summer. So that meant a lot of water coming down, that made high current. That means that it resuspends the sediment, and it's in this sediment that you have these particles that normally would settle down. But when you resuspend it, or when you have a lot of boat traffic, actually you come to situations where all of these things get resuspended, so you have these particles in the water. And this is what we've seen. Not in every event. There have been a couple of events, especially after longer dry periods, where water quality was actually good by all standards, including by the comprehensive count. What I mean good is below the 1,000 E. coli per 100 ml safety standard imposed by the World Triathlon. If you go to other countries, in the United States, that standard is 126. So it's each country has its own standard. The World Triathlon is quite generous with its standards for water.
Because that's also, I believe, one of the challenges, or actually two of the challenges. These standards and the regulation. The standards you are saying they may be, or they are different between American cities, European cities, and maybe within European cities, within certain countries, it's also different. Some are more permissible, some are less. So where we are in the, and also there's a regulation in place, I assume, by the European Union, but it's not standardized yet. How you see this?
It is. I mean, there is a bathing water directive which sets the standards, but for the Olympic events, it was the triathlon and the World Triathlon and World Aquatics organizations that organized the triathlon and the marathon swimming, and then they set their own standards for competing in open waters, which are a little bit different, not that different, but somewhat different from the European standards. And then, you have the European...
Like higher standards than the European, or what they set up?
By the European standards, it's a little bit complex because the European standards involve doing an average over all the samples collected over a 4-year period, and you need to have, for sufficient water quality, the geometric mean, and at the 90th percentile needs to be below 900. So, I mean, it gets technical to calculate this. But, 900 is sort of used as a proxy. So you say, well, above 900, if you have consistent values above 900, that bathing site would not qualify under the European regulations if you did the average over 4 years. So you try to be below 900. Well, the World Triathlon normally tries to be below 500, but in some cases it can make exceptions and accept limits up to 1,000. And this is the case in Paris.
Right. So would you say that is kind of enough? Or do we need to be more strict, or how do you see this, or how would you like to have the regulation, or maybe the policymakers to be more aware of what the policymakers need to do to?
The problem is not where you set the limit. The real problem is that you're not measuring the right thing today with the standard methods. So, however you set the limit, you're not going to be right because the starting point is wrong. When you have these fecal particles, they represent a major risk, which is completely not taken into account. And, with the standard method, you may measure values that are below 900 or 1,000. But when you actually account for these fecal particles, you actually have values that can be at 5,000. So, in that case, what do? The standard methods don't see these. So, the methods in themselves, these are methods that were developed 30 and 50 years ago. Some of them were developed by Pasteur. I mean, that tells you how old
they are, yes.
They are. So, at the time, it was the best technology available. All the regulations were built on that. And they were built on very few epidemiological studies. I mean, we're talking about studies involving a couple thousand people done in the 80s, and that's it. And the World Health Organization, then they had to adopt a standard. They adopted a standard based on the wrong methods and applied on a very small number of people. And then these were intrinsically adopted by the European Union. The United States, they went a completely different path. They did their own epidemiology studies, mostly around the Great Lakes. And then they developed their own standards, and they came up with very different numbers. So it is also the United States are a little bit ahead of the European Union in the fact that they start to use DNA-based methods, which are a comprehensive method. A DNA-based method will measure the DNA from all the bacteria present, including those on a particle. So it is a comprehensive method like the method we developed. Our method, though, looks at culturable bacteria, so it goes through a culture step. It's not DNA-based, but it measures the same thing. So there are new methods, and some countries have adopted them, and now are building regulations based on these new methods. In Europe, we're stuck with some old methods, and the current bathing water directive is under revision. So we are currently discussing at the European level, explaining our findings and explaining their relevance and why they need to be taken into account in the new regulations. But
because what you have, you have a gold mine because you have the data, the real data you have been collecting. I believe, I don't know how many cities you already have been working with, but I may assume that it's a significant amount of data, real, historical, for years and years, to prove one that the standard may need to be modified, and second, the measurement techniques need to evolve. So that's, are they really paying attention to the data? I mean, everybody has an opinion,
Well,
but hey,
they're starting
data
to, I think
is what it is.
So people are starting to pay a lot of attention to the data. I think the fact that we provided the Olympics data as open data, we made it available, including with all the methodology. We have the data tables that everybody can download and they can study and they can understand. I think that made it, gave us visibility and gave us credibility. And, what we saw is, our planktonic counts and the laboratory counts are very close together, which is what you'd expect. But these complete counts, which also contain the particles, were at times really, really high. And yes, I mean, people are noticing that, and a lot of questions are starting to be asked. And if you talk with a specialist in water quality and with risk assessors, they understand the issue. The problem was that until very recently, there were no methods that were able to measure all these bacteria. So they were sort of put under the rug, so nobody talks about that. And all the microbiology community used the standard methods just because they didn't have anything better. But
Are
a
you
lot
seeing
of the
some
people
sort of evolution in these opinions? And is there at large the water utility? And I don't mean maybe only the technical people working at the water utilities, but also the management or the higher decision makers. Are they really getting open or to change these methodologies or to receive at least more input from these new methodologies? How do you see that?
Well, I mean, in some countries like the UK, there is a little bit of a storm, metaphorically speaking, about water quality. There is a lot of political pressure right now to change standards, and we're working with the United Kingdom Environment Agency, the UKEA, and they are becoming aware about these issues, and many of the utilities, they are also starting, they see that the counts that they provide, they suggest water quality, is okay. But when you actually measure the comprehensive count, they see that it's really not okay. So, there is this discrepancy which applies pressure on some of the regulatory agencies, applies pressure on some of the utilities. But, I mean, in the end, science will prevail, It's useless to go against science, and what we're trying to do is to provide the best possible scientific proof of the situation, and we're trying to get other people involved that do the same kind of studies, so the available data increases. And you're right, we already have data from multiple cities, multiple types of water. The same problem, we see it in water reuse. And there are new European regulations for water reuse. This is wastewater treated to be used for agriculture, for example, which is really a requirement today. You were speaking about droughts and about rainfall variability. I mean, we cannot just throw away our wastewater and let it evaporate. It will, especially in the southern countries in Europe, water reuse is becoming a reality, and it will expand into the north for sure. It's already being used extensively in Mexico, in the southern United States. I mean, it's something that you cannot avoid. So the standards for water safety, they are extremely important, because if you irrigate with water that contains a lot of pathogens, well, the lettuce you irrigate then will take those pathogens to a plate.
Exactly.
And you can get a food outbreak. So,
and that you're touching a super important point, because we have also heard this conversation about the circularity. There you go. Is it whether it's wastewater or rainwater? How do we harvest that water to put it in some place to be then used for irrigation, and if there's all these crops that will end up being for human consumption, well, which type of water are we? With which type of water are we irrigating those fields? So that means that at least the technology that you have, it opens up, like for this technology, it's not just the established drinking water or the established city infrastructure when this can be, where your technology and sensors can be used, but also outside, literally outside in the field, where there may be this type of solutions they can be, this technology that you have can be used.
Yeah, and we have done actually quite a bit of studies in irrigation fields and looking at irrigation sources, irrigation canals, and measuring the same thing. And what we've seen in some irrigation canals is that just a few particles in suspension can increase the E. coli count by a factor of 100 compared to what you measure with the standard method. So the discrepancies can be orders of magnitude. So it is a really big issue, and the problem is sometimes even the utilities that are treating the water, they don't know how to measure it. They use membrane filtration, they get a low count, and then when you actually use a comprehensive method, you see, not at all, because those colonies you counted are not single bacteria. Those are really fecal particles, because your treatment process does not allow enough time for sedimentation. You have a lot of suspended matter in the effluent, and your method is unable to count that. But that is a huge risk for the crops you're going to irrigate with that water. So these are, we're starting to talk to a panel of specialists in water quality that understand these issues, and these need to be brought up, to the scientists in the field, but to the regulators, to the water utility managers, to the drinking water managers, to the municipalities. I mean, there is a lot of work to be done there, but we have very strong data now that proves it. So, we're confident that with a lot of perseverance, we are going to change a little bit water safety in the world. We hope so.
Change the water safety in the world. It is not just a little contribution. I would say that would be a significant contribution. And if we can recap, yes, this is a situation, a problem that needs collaboration. All the different people, stakeholders that you mentioned, from water utilities, from policymakers, from the academia, the science, even from our side, the manufacturers that produce all these materials to build the infrastructure, how we all are coming together. So there's no one single silver bullet, of course. This means collaboration. And as you said, as a base of everything, science, data. Everybody has an opinion until the data comes into place and, hey, this is just the reality. That's it. Dan, this has been super interesting conversation. Thank you so much. And actually, you mentioned also that the data from the Paris Olympics, you have it public. That is the only one that you have public, right, in your website?
Absolutely. It is available on our website, along with explanations and along with every single event commented out about from the perspective of water quality.
Yes, certainly. Well, we will make sure that we link that in the show notes of this episode. So for the people who want to dig deeper into all these very specific technicalities of what happened, that's the only data that is public, to be clear. Dan, thank you so much. This has been super insightful, and maybe I will try to commit you in like 6 months or something. Can we catch up again and see how we moved, how we progressed? So let's come back and see if we have been really doing some progress in this.
Thank you so much, Delphin. It's been a real pleasure, and absolutely, let's reconnect in a few months, and hopefully we'll have some exciting news to report.
Some exciting good news on science-based research. Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Urbanistas, for listening today, and see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Urbanista podcast, a production of Uponor Infra, the leader in sustainable infrastructure solutions. If you found it interesting, why don't you share it with your colleagues? We all together can move our industry forward.